So, my presentation will focus on the ANZACs, of course, and Greece. I'll try to interpret the memory and the legacy because one of my fields, and I'm really interested about that, is how we save the memory, or if there is any memory of what we're doing in history. And it's rather impressive when you explore Greek nation and the ideas and the memories that survived through centuries. So let me begin. In the early 20th century and 19th century, we're talking about the identity of Greece. Greece, not only as a nation but as a state, right? So it was the time that after the Greek War of Independence that began in 1821, and when the Ottoman Empire left Greece, and in 1833 we had a new state, a new kingdom, the Kingdom of Greece. We're talking about a difficult time of the country. 4 centuries of Ottoman occupation not only created a very difficult moment about what was to be a Greek, if there was any identity left. And we're talking for a country that wasn't actually a country, a nation that wasn't actually a nation. So from the very beginning, it has to be reinvented or find any roots from its ancient past, or Byzantium, or any kind of past that could actually give people a new identity, because most of them weren't really sure if they were Greeks or part of the Ottoman Empire or Ottomans or whatever they are. We're talking about 400 years, right? One of the main difficulties it's that the state was really so small. There was almost no infrastructure, and of course, a very difficult task is that there was no state to support anything. So they have to build everything from the very beginning. While they were trying, the state and then the king, they were trying to build the infrastructure and the basic state organizations, scholars and educators and schools were trying to create a new identity, a lost identity. I say a new identity because it was far too long lost. One of the things that they did is create a bond between ancient Greece and modern Greece, which is, of course, a very basic and important bond, but this gave aspirations for a Western and modern Greek state, which was good, of course. But it wasn't that easy because the Ottomans were still very powerful, and we're talking for a new world that, anyways, it was trying to create and find its roots, not only in Greece but in Europe as well. So this is Greece in 1830s, the Greek part. So the whole other thing is Ottoman Empire. So we're talking about only the green thing is Greek. So you see that we're not talking about the Greece as it is today. There were so much to be done. In this early century, when I'm talking about the early 19th century, 18th century, sorry, when Greek entered this great war, there were aspirations for a Greece of 2 continents, Europe and Asia, and 5 seas, the Ionian, Aegean, Marmara Sea, Libyan, and Black Sea. So this is the idea of using Greece's unique geographical position, and of course to create connections between all the cultures that have actually lived in this country, and generally the area of this part of the Mediterranean. Let's focus more on Limnos. Limnos Island is where you see this huge arrow I put. As you see, these were actually attached to Greece in more or less in 1913. If you see the changes, you'll see that the middle part, which is Thessaly, it was attached 1881, and the next parts were 1913. So many years. It was so difficult for Greek people, for Greek nation, for Greek state to actually attach these parts, because it wasn't only about the game wasn't only played between armies, but most of it was between diplomats. Let's focus more on Limnos Island, which is more or less an unknown island, not only for people that do not live in Greece or they are not Greeks, but for us as well, because it is far. When I mean far, in Greece, unfortunately, we're talking about a heavily centrally urbanized environment. So Athens is the head of everything. And when someone says it's far, it more or less it depends on where you are in Athens or Thessaloniki, which is the next big city here. So the connections generally with the islands is really difficult, and this makes it even more important that Limnos became the center of this campaign, the Gallipoli campaign, because it was foreigners that actually used this island because it was centrally located in what they wanted to do. But nowadays, in the last many decades, these islands are left as isolated areas or far, because actually you need like a day in order to, if you take the ship to go there. Why Limnos? Because of this strategic position. So you see on your left is the island, and on your line is Asia Minor. Gallipoli is up on your right corner. So you see that it's really so close. Imbros and Tenedos, they weren't Greek, and they're not Greek islands, so it was the closest part, plus the fact that it is a huge place. So it could be a base for massive army and any kind of equipment they wanted to use. The basic thing is that there was an idea from the Greek dictator Metaxas, who wasn't a very bright person. However, as a politician, he had some ideas that kept him in power for a while. What he believed, he thought it was that if Greeks could conquer Gallipoli, then they could threaten Ottomans and Istanbul. An idea that in reality it was the same with the idea British had some years later. Of course, it's funny because there are all these aspirations that Greek army could threaten Istanbul or later Ankara, created a chaos and a disaster, because even if you do count the armies or the powers or the possibilities, it was impossible to do that. It was unnecessary, in my opinion, but it was impossible, even if the whole army of Greece were made of special forces and whatever, SEALs. It was impossible, because you couldn't really make the connection. Even now and then and ever, Turkeys are far, far more than Greek people. So its army, it's really massive comparing to Greece. And of course, it wasn't heavily supported, the Greek army by the superpowers of the era. Later, Venizelos, who was legally a governor of the country, put Hellas in the game as a key player, because he actually needed the expansion, and this was the time to do it. So using Limnos, allowing powers to use Limnos, created the basis for him to put Greece back in the game. And while I'm I'm really against all this idea of expansionism and the country of two continents and five seas. I should stress that Venizelos was a very clever politician, and he understood that partially, if not heavily, the game was played in with diplomats, and it was the time, if he wanted his country to become bigger and gain some of its area and soil. If Gallipoli was successful, which was really difficult because we're talking about a very difficult campaign. I mean, I'm sure that you other fellow scholars there have talked heavily and more in detail about that. If Greece was if the campaign was successful, Greece wouldn't have suffered the Smyrna catastrophe, which was a huge, had a huge impact in the reality and identity of Greece, not always in a negative way, but it created a chaos and really gave at least the pride of Greeks suffered for many years. And so if this was okay, so most of Greek history and Turkish history would be different. It's just an if, but I would like just like to mention it. What happened in Limnos? Let me give you some innovations. Limnos, which was, as I said, an isolated place, it's really far now, so imagine 100 years ago how far would that be from basic urban centers like Thessaloniki or Athens. So in Limnos there was the powers created a massive camp. The whole island became a camp. It was the first time and last, I might stress, that train lines were put on an island. There is no train lines elsewhere in Greece. No island has it. And to tell you the truth, train lines, it's not our best thing in Greece. We only have one that covers 3/3 of the country, but some others, mainland, do not have, and of course no island has this thing. Sorry, they established the powers, the foreign powers, a factor of desalination, which is not common in Greece, while Greece is sort of an island, right? Everywhere is, you can find sea, which was a huge innovation, and unfortunately the states after that, the Greek states, didn't really take an example from the powers in order to establish it in every island. No, not every island has this kind of factories nowadays. Most of them use other kinds of water, which actually pure water that comes from the mainland. So they carry there with ships. So it was a really huge innovation. The role of women, of course, even if you check Greek history from ancient times, women have had and will always have a central role. Local and foreign women, because many foreign women traveled there as well, were really a big part, because we're talking about especially local women, right? Who were trained in order to become nurses or support in any way they could, because actually for locals it was a huge thing to support the foreign powers, because they understood that it was like supporting their own selves and their own existence. Limnos became the center of the campaign, unfortunately later used as exile for communists. We're talking about 1940s, 50s, 60s. It was these crazy parts and ironic parts of history where you have an island which actually gave, even if the Gallipoli campaign wasn't successful, it really became the basis for something really important for World War I. However, later the governments used it for a really dark part of Greek history. Exile and places and for communists or people that were against of of the current governments were sent to exile, died there, suffered, because it's really a big part of history, and it's worth discovering it and discussing it some other time. Let me focus more on legacy and collective memory. It's really important to discuss of what we have on collective memory about Limnos and Gallipoli campaign. I can tell you almost nothing, I would say, but come on, let me be modest. Still thought to be an exile, right? It's very far. Problematic ship connections. However, it's the military presence, the Greek one, of course. It's heavy there because it's right next to Turkey, and of course, as we all know, for some reason, we should always, Greeks and Turkeys have to be must have a fight, while we both know that peoples have really so many connections and really do not hate each other. It's a huge, a massive stereotype. However, the governments and when the governments became too extreme, I mean, you track the news, right? So once again, there's a mayhem between these two countries, and of course, so much equipment is being sold by the current superpowers, which is always a good market for them. Let me give you about collective memory, right? There is no memory. While I mean there is no memory, first of all, there are no survivors, right? Secondly, the archives that have kept, if they have kept, they are so small. They are everything you can find, almost 90% is in Limnos. When you check the history school books, which is a very basic element of keeping memory alive, there is no reference of the campaign and the general idea of ANZAC. I can say that the only reference I found, let's say, to the modern history, to the history school book of modern Greek history of the last class of school, it says that many people came from Gallipoli, Greek ones, I mean, and the other places in Asia Minor, because of the Turkeys and the difficulties that they had during the war, and the Smyrna catastrophe. The whole thing is connected to the catastrophe of Smyrna, which is not the memory we want for the campaign of Gallipoli. It's a completely different thing. If are to be found, ANZACs can be found in World War II and the Battle of Crete against the Nazis. There are references. I can recall it from my own self. My grandparent shared some of these memories with me. However, it's if you find anything, it is of the Second World War, which is closer. Still, there are some survivors, very old ones, but at least my generation, I'm 35, so they have shared some of these memories. And of course it is sort of, if I can say that, fancier for the media to keep it, because Nazis were extremely brutal in wherever they were in Greece. So it created, it really attracts the viewer, because there are still photographs, memories, and all the kinds of evidences in order to prove how brutal they are. So ANZACs really did something amazing, coming from the other part of the world to help Greek people. This created a huge bond between Australians and with Greeks and Australians and New Zealanders. Even if it comes from the Second World War, still the connection is there. And of course, we have thousands and thousands of Greek people went as immigrants to Australia, so it created an extra bond. Let me give you be quick and give some conclusions. we need to explore and promote these parts in history school books and memory. People have no idea, not only in Greece, I know that it happens heavily in many other countries as well. This is what we partially want to promote in this conference. We should add these memories, these stories in the history school books so people can get acquainted with. I believe that we should connect the dots of history. It's an idea I have and I promote that we are parts, that history can be seen as a game, right? Connecting the dots so people can understand that everything is interconnected. Limnos Friends of ANZAC, it's really important if you want to look at it. They promote the idea, they're based in Limnos, and this is the idea that local collective memory is trying to be kept alive. They're trying to do it, but of course, because there is no media representation in other parts, like the national media, you cannot find it. Victors or no victors, oh my god, I have no idea who writes history, but I guess it's not those that lost. So I believe that this is a part that we should add when we discover history, that probably we learn more from stories and places and parts of history that we lost. This is what can remain, and I believe that most of national history tries to cut these memories. Thank you so much. Let me give you an amazing view of the Mediterranean. I know that everybody's jealous of it. So if you need any ideas you would like to share with me, any opinions, any comments, please send me an email, or if it's possible, I'll be there through Skype. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much, the organizers. Bye bye from Greece.